So I was talking to my therapist about this show, which I feel like is such a New Yorker thing to say and such a New Yorker thing to do as well, right? Like, I think at any given time in New York, it's 50% of people in therapy are trying to trick their therapists into helping them name or find an ending for their one person show. That's my supposition. One of the important parts of being a New Yorker. But I was talking with her about the show, and she said, I don't understand, after I'd explained it a while. And then I explained it some more, and she still said, I don't understand. And then I explained it some more. And then finally she said, so I don't get it. Is this a TED talk or a comedy show? And I was like, oh, you have just summed up my entire performing experience in one line. Thank you, therapist. Uh, so this is second helping. So I'm from a stoic, Germanic, rural Midwestern farm family. Any complaint was meant with the verbal admonition, there's more to life than being happy, um, which is true, but there's more to life than breathing, and breathing is a good place to start. Or it would be met with my dad's quoting, most people are just about as happy as they make up their mind they're going to be, which he would attribute alternately to Dale Carnegie or Abraham Lincoln. I recently learned that sometimes this is attributed to Dale Carnegie quoting Abe Lincoln, and I call bullshit on that because Abraham Lincoln was clinically depressed by all estimations, and I don't think that's the situation in which somebody says there's more life, or most people are just about as happy as they make up their mind they're going to be. I don't think anyone's going to mix up Abe Lincoln and Joel Osteen. You know what I mean? My sister one time brought home from the library that Free to Be, that's Touchy 70 Feelies album, Free to Be You and Me. And we were listening to one of our favorite songs, which was Rosie Greer, the football player, singing, It's All Right to Cry. All the kids gathered in the living room. Just then my dad walked through the room. He looked at us, said, I hope nobody's getting any fucking ideas around here. And we didn't say anything because we were not getting any fucking ideas. My brother used to say, I guess this was hyperbole, but technically I wouldn't want to try it, that if you had a farming accident and you came running into the living room, Mom, the thresher cut off my thumb and it's lying out there in the yard. My mom would say, no, you march out there and you pick up that thumb. We don't just leave stuff lying around like that. So I can't lie. I mean, as an adult, I really appreciate the strength and perseverance that this gave me, right? It's very valuable. I do appreciate it. It's useful every day. But if somebody was trying to help us out, like even in a favor, if we were in a bad mess, and we were sometimes in bad messes, my parents would turn it down with, they're just trying to be nice. Which was confusing because probably they were doing it just to be nice. But why were we the anti-niceness police? I think, to answer my own question, since you can't, I think it was because if you needed someone to be nice to you, that was a sign of weakness, and that was very bad, or at least super dangerous. Now, part of this is just, Midwest parenting, Midwest 70s parenting, but also my parents, their life struggle had been really intense. And I guess they just lived in this fear that if they sent out their kids into the world without a very thick layer of armor, we would be crushed. So they didn't teach us how to deal with our own vulnerability, like how to ask for, or really even just accept help if somebody offered it to us. But they didn't also didn't teach us how to, beat a kangaroo in Jello wrestling. It was to them just not a relevant part of the curriculum. If anyone would have asked, we said we were Lutherans, but our real religion was self-reliance. So I met Heather McCallister in 2007 when she was performing, and I was performing comedy at a queer conference in the Newark, New Jersey airport, Ramada Inn. Very classy. I was walking down the hallway outside the lobby and I tripped over my own 2 feet and I dropped all the handouts for the Subverting the Rigid Gender Binary workshop. And I was, of course, brushing aside all assistance until this beautiful woman, so beautiful, in these black tights and a flowered skirt over them, just ignored my words. And she told me that let people help you. People want to help. And I was kind of glued to the spot for the minute, for just for a moment, because I wasn't really expecting to have my entire worldview from childhood challenged in that moment by a beautiful, bossy stranger. But then, when she handed the papers back to me, she whispered soft and deep, accepting help is hot. 3 hours and much making out and sexy times later, Heather kicked me out of her hotel room because she said she needed her beauty sleep. I asked, oh, I was wondering if burlesque queens wake up with glittery lips. She said, maybe someday, if you stick around, you'll find out. So I headed home to, at that time, Philadelphia, and she returned to the West Coast. And we did stick around, both of us, as much as you can when you live on opposite coasts. And we made weekend trips and proceeded to fall in love. We built a relationship with chats and visits and phone calls and AOL Instant Messenger and no particular sense of urgency. During our first full weekend together, Heather told me she had a history of ovarian cancer, and it sounded like that, like a history, something in the past. But a few months into our relationship, the ovarian cancer that had been in remission returned. And she got sick bit by bit at first, but then all at once. And we were still falling in love, but our late night sexy talks morphed into, oh, can you talk me in through to getting to another pain pill and chemo and side effects? And then finally, what makes life worth living? What makes life worth fighting for? Heather had a great group of friends surrounding her, and they were a great support to her, but it seemed like if we were going to be geographically together, it needed to be sooner because later seemed like it might not even happen. So I gave notice at my very beloved nursing job and packed for my cross-country trip. People will sometimes ask me if that was a hard decision. And if you love somebody who's dying and they live 3,000 miles away, and they might live a while longer, but also they might not, and they have logistical needs that can be met by somebody with your skill set and mindset and heart set, I mean, what other choice is there? How many people have the opportunity to be the exact right person at the exact right moment? Living out the decision, oh, that was hard as fuck, but the actual choice was just a joyous hell yeah. So in Portland, we moved together into a partially converted Hare Krishna temple we found on Craigslist. Now, my beloved queer people who do love to fact check a performance piece have informed me that the Hare Krishna temple, they're like, how is it even converted? And I was like, well, it wasn't really, I mean, the Hare Krishnas didn't live there anymore, but it's in truth, it looked exactly the same. It was painted this beautiful, bright gold inside and out. We called it the castle. It had the main room upstairs where they kind of held like worship services or whatever, about 700 square feet, large enough to put on a show. Downstairs had all these wacky features, like not just one, but two sets of stairs that didn't go anywhere. And there was a beautiful backyard garden with mature grape arbor and a teeny tiny pond and a big statue of the Virgin Mary. And the place that Heather picked out for her bed was on the raised area in front of the 700-foot area. So the burlesque queen put her bed on a stage. So it was kind of perfect. We felt like we'd been given a little slice of heaven. And, you know, I have to say, I really appreciated that Heather took a chance on me when other folks might be doing the emotional equivalent of, I don't know, curling up on the couch and eating Oreos. She was a tough diva, but she was also in a vulnerable situation, and she hadn't always had amazing partners. She didn't have any assurance, just my word, that I could hang in sickness and in health. And I mean, y'all know this, even under less extreme circumstances, there comes a time in every newly cohabitating couple's life where one looks the other and says, seriously though, seriously, were you actually raised by wolves? I was so scattered. I lost her $200 prescription sunglasses. I was so overconfident in my ability. I insisted that I could make a bathtub from used building materials, even though I've never really built anything. And I think probably most annoying, I was grossly over solicitous. One morning, as she sat getting treatment in the oncology seat, and you know how they're like in chemo suites, they're just like a bunch of chairs lined up, and I had taken the chair next to her, and I was fussing around and bringing her graham crackers she had not asked for, and orange juice she didn't want, and stroking her hand, and I was saying, "You're doing great, honey. I love you. You're just doing great." And she opened one eye and said, "What the hell are you, the chemo whisperer or something?" Thanks to this new form of chemo, but not, I believe, to my whispering, she got better a lot. And there wasn't any real possibility. We knew we weren't growing old together, but we had a sudden, unexpected chunk of time. We stretched our 3 hour stand into more than a year. Between treatments, Heather spoke at an LGBT cancer conference. We found our way through many a hay bale maze in the heterosexual area of Portland. We soaked in the Bagbury hot springs at the foot of Mount Hood, and we hosted ridiculous potluck theme parties. We had 75 people at our house for a Halloween party. Heather got out of bed to host, and she was wearing this beautiful regal blue green length floor length gown that she had gotten at the San Francisco Opera used clothing sale a few years before the party. She hosted a surprise costume contest, and that it was a surprise in that I did not know we were having a costume or a contest, and she gave away stuff from around the house as prizes. We even saved our pennies to make a pilgrimage to the healing water of Lourdes, France. Was this trip ironic? Was a question our friends asked us. We were both lapsed Catholics, and we were just kind of covering our bases. We made out in the grotto where Mary first appeared to Saint Bernadette. And when we went to Mass, I looked over and saw that Heather was wearing socks that had pictures of cartoon devils on them. In Paris, 3 days out from chemo, still pink cheeked and hyper from the post treatment steroids, Heather climbed all 284 stairs of l'Arc de Triomphe. You know, those of us not living each day as if it were our last, I said. I was gasping for air, trying to run along behind her, are having a little trouble keeping up with those of us who are. In response, she kissed me and patted me on the butt. Come for the kisses, stay for the death. I was like, that is so morbid. She nodded and ruffled my sweaty hair. Morbid, but absolutely true. We were having real fun. We were having fun. But as the year grew to close, the chemo stopped working and cancer became less of a background issue and more of a focus of our daily lives. Heather had great support in Portland, and so I did too, but I didn't have the option of completely falling apart. You know, I was trying to be a caregiver, but I could still feel pieces of me breaking off, thinking about what life would be like without her. We were at her favorite Whole Foods when she left for another aisle, but didn't tell me. And when she returned, I was crying. I said, I couldn't find you. And she just looked at me like completely bewildered. And then made silent eye contact for a minute. Wait, were you thinking one day you'll come here and you really won't be able to find me? And I just nodded because I was sobbing. And she thought for a minute and said, you know, when I'm dead, you won't be at the natural food store buying organic produce. You'll be back at Safeway picking up $1.99 hot dogs. She took my hand and we finished shopping. We started with home hospice after the new year. The hospice nurses made everything easier, but I think we confused them a little. On the afternoon they were first coming to do intake, there had been this rare Portland snow, and it was very wet, the kind that makes really perfect snowballs. Heather was outside getting some fresh air, and I was attempting to shovel the sidewalk in front of our house with a broom. It was Portland. I didn't know how to shovel. So when I walked past our car, I scooped up a bunch of snow from the hood. Heather said, I know you aren't about to start a snowball fight, are you? I said, am I? I wasn't sure. Is that like a great idea or a terrible idea? I didn't know. So I kind of lobbed a test snowball in a general direction. And she responded by grabbing all this snow from the top of the car and putting it down the front of my thermal. And then when I tried to run away, she pelted me with even more snow. So I ran behind a neighbor's car, made a bunch of snowballs, and was throwing them at her from behind the safety of the SUV. And then, just then, the hospice nurse drove up. She was like, are you guys having a snowball fight? Heather said, you're a hospice nurse. What's it going to do? Kill me? And the hospice nurse, to her very great credit, in a moment I remember to this day, said, "That is a very good point." And Heather had been raised in the Midwest too. I was from Wisconsin and she was from Michigan, but she weirdly did not mind people doing things for her, even if they were just doing it to be nice. She had a whole email list, a Yahoo list to be precise, folks who had signed up to be there for her caregiving group. She called them the Love Troopers, which was a name she'd made up coming out of surgery, so it was a little sweet and kind of corny since she was under the influence when she made it up. She lived what she had whispered in my ear that evening in the Ramada Inn. Let people help you. People want to help. And while my parents had framed accepting help as weakness, that was truly what they believed. Um, that's not what I was seeing in Heather's relationship with her love troopers. I saw, well, it's true that people want to help. That's true. I believe that. But people are also busy and full of shit sometimes and wounded and afraid of hospitals. People came through for her in grand ways and like glorious and beautiful ways and also failed her. I I couldn't see weakness in that to accept help from the troop of folks who were just trying to be nice. To me, it seemed brave. If you let people help you, you were signing up to be disappointed at least sometimes. One day in January, Heather probed me awake from a sound sleep, wanting to continue this very discussion. Get up. Are you awake? I want you to promise to accept help from whoever offers it. Now we'd had a lot of discussions about, letting people help around the house, and I thought that's what she meant, like just help with the dishes or whatever. But she motioned to her what she was wearing. She was fully dressed. 3 o'clock in the morning, she was fully dressed with like, beautiful skirt and her, and a hat and her signature feather boa. She was like, "This is an important conversation. I mean, when I'm dead, you need to accept help from whoever offers it." And then she started poking me in the ribs. "Let people help you. People want to help." And I tried to squirm away because I was giggling and she was poking me in the ribs, but she was serious and she just kept doing it until I promised. When somebody you love is dying, you say yes a lot. And then a few weeks later, I knew things were getting close. I called Heather from the grocery store and I said, "Is there anything I can bring you?" She responded, "Yeah, a quarter pound of the will to live." I said, "Oh, honey, you know how it is. I'm at Trader Joe's and they only had organic and now they're all out." She was like, "Damn, I had a coupon." Physician assisted suicide is legal in Oregon, and Heather had arranged to meet with Barbara Glidemore, our government assigned liaison at her hospital for this assisted suicide process. So me and a group of Heather's closest friends hunched around a table in a way far out of way conference room at the hospital where Heather got care. And Barbara explained, this process isn't for everyone. This process is for, it's for patients for whom retaining control is paramount, the most important thing. Now, I have to say, like, this was not the first conversation that we had about this subject. The last phone call before I moved, Heather had mentioned this possibility and asked for my support. But when somebody you love is dying, you say yes to whatever they ask. But then it was theoretical. But with this news, that this process is for a patient for whom retaining control is paramount. I mean, Heather was the boss and she was my boss. I called her my queen, and that wasn't even facetiously, Retaining control was tremendously important for her. So things just got really real. So here's the process for assisted suicide. You have to do a bunch of paperwork, and then you have to make 2 oral and 1 written requests. And then you have to find a doctor who will write the prescription. And then you have to find a pharmacist who will fill the prescription. And then, having done all this, you activate the sequence whenever you're ready. The process is long and complicated, has a lot of safeguards in it, and many who complete it never even use their life-ending medication. Just having the medication in the house gives them a certain kind of peace of mind. Heather had other plans. So it was, I think, in early February when I was sleeping curled up beside her. I heard her talking on the phone, informing whoever was on the other end that they should get to Portland as soon as possible because she was doing it in the morning. I waited until she was done, and I explained that when a person decides they're going to use assisted suicide to hasten their death, they're supposed to tell the person sleeping beside them before they start telling the world. She apologized for not following the correct procedure and kissed me. And we looked at each other for a moment, and then I got out of bed, put on some water for tea, and started making phone calls. Heather was so overambitious to think it was going to be done by the next day. Whether you're updating your address at the DMV or filing an application to end your life, you cannot rush bureaucracy. But she was ready to die, and waiting was so hard for her. But 3 days later, 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday, things were in place. And Heather wanted to die surrounded by love, and half of Queer Portland was in our house. Heather's best friends had come, one from San Francisco wearing thigh-high leather boots, and half a dozen ex-lovers and current friends. There were other folks too. The radical fairies stopped in and out, bringing with them the smell of patchouli and body odor and their sweetness, and as much Reiki as anyone in the house wanted. Heather's biological sisters had traveled to join us, and they completed the circle. It felt good, if a little bit surreal, to have us all acting like family. Barbara Glidemore, the hospital-assisted suicide liaison, she was sitting on our purple leopard print couch, surrounded by forms, and she made conversation with crossed legs in her Ann Taylor suit like it was very customary, and this was the third converted Hare Krishna temple full of queer freaks she had been to that morning. I was impressed, but not surprised, that everyone was willing to be part of this, queer death circus. Heather was tremendously loved, and she let people love her. She didn't seem worried that people were being there for her just to be nice. A friend had offered to mix up the lethal dose of oral medication that Heather would take. For best absorption, you are supposed to put this medication in water or applesauce. Heather said, "The last taste in my mouth is not going to be applesauce." So her friend Kina swirled the white powder into Heather's requested medium, Cozy Shack chocolate pudding. I muttered, "Oh my God, I hope this works or she will definitely kill us." We went behind the curtain. Kina handed the bowl to Heather. Heather ate the pudding. She died. It was terrible. I remember that moment. I thought, I can't feel this sad. I can't feel this sad for even 5 more minutes. I was so wrong. I felt that way for a very long time. And because I promised Heather and I was a complete and total mess, I let people help me. Maybe they were just trying to be nice, but I was so depleted I didn't know what else to do. My friend Stacy moved into the castle with me so I wouldn't have to be alone. In the immediate aftermath, someone on a young widow's listserv I was on gave the advice that you should try and do a few things that you couldn't do if your partner was still alive. So I bought multiple cans of spray cheese, which was pretty much everything I ate for weeks. And I would just spray it directly into my mouth. There was even a stray cat that I started letting into the house. I would try and spray it directly into his mouth, but he was wiser than me and knows that how bad high sodium stuff is for cats, and so he declined. Ultimately, I moved to New York a few months after Heather died because I couldn't live in our strange home without her. I had some good friends in New York City, and they protected me from Cozy Shack chocolate pudding with the kind of heart-stopping physical enthusiasm more customarily reserved for characters in action-adventure movies. In any situation where I might find myself in close proximity to that familiar, you all know, brown and yellow tub, a grocery store, a party, at least one occasion in my friend's refrigerator, friends of any age or any physical ability would launch their entire bodies through space, silent no's forming with their mouths, in order to prevent my having a close encounter of the pudding kind. This was very sweet and kind and so thoughtful, and there was nothing I could do. I could not assure them that it was unnecessary. But It was unnecessary because, and can you keep a secret? Just you all on Zoom and on Facebook and the people watching later and the people what? I consumed an entire container of Cozy Shack chocolate pudding less than 6 weeks after Heather died. Because, I had no intention of letting chocolate pudding be the boss of me. And also, chocolate pudding is delicious. I don't know. Maybe if Heather had eaten deadly Brussels sprouts, it would have been less of a priority in my emotional recovery. But pudding eating notwithstanding, I was such a mess. New York City is the perfect place to cry in peace. In Portland, if you so much as shed a tear on public transportation, you'll be immediately offered a Kleenex or a vegan cookie or sliding scale energy work. In New York City, you'd have to carry a severed head to get that kind of attention. And I think it would have to be your own severed head. But man, everyone cries on the A train, and so I did too. On the extremely rare occasions that anyone would take notice and stare, I just became a very aggressive crier. What, you've never seen a butch dyke cry before? Stick around, there's 20 more minutes coming up just like this. A friend suggested affirmations. I only had one. Just for today, I will not lay down in the gutter and die. I mentioned this to the grief group I joined at the LGBT Center. One of my fellow sad people observed, I don't know. Is that even an option in New York? The gutters are mostly full. Someone will come along and poke you with a stick. They say time heals all wounds, which makes me want to punch whoever they are in the head. But time, the support of good friends, and uninterrupted crying on the atrium can accomplish something like a miracle. I had been convinced that my life was over at 38. I was sure I would not love anyone like Heather again, which was true. I grew to love somebody very unlike Heather. On April 4th, I went on the first date with an introverted performance poet with a wicked sense of humor and a very impressive work ethic. We had coffee and we went to a mutual friend's one-woman show. It was a performance art piece about cancer. I didn't know that in advance. And then we somehow ended up awkwardly and passionately making out in the back room of a gay men's bar in the East Village. We both drank Red Bull and lapsed into very, very stilted, awkward silences whenever we stopped the nerdy makeout session to get some air. It was like, two 12th grade, 12-year-old boys on a date or something. Later in the evening, Cheryl said, so this is definitely a date then? And we both laughed so hard that the horny men cruising stopped long enough to crane their heads around and see what were the middle-aged dykes laughing at. We were so different. I grew up in a farming community in rural Wisconsin. She grew up in an Italian-American enclave in Staten Island. She thinks pasta is a comfort food. I think it's something you eat when you don't have any meat left in the house. My specialty dish, the one I impress my dates with, is pot roast. Cheryl is a vegetarian. We played a game called New York When, trying to remember what we were doing on a specific day in the 90s. She as a performance poet / artist, and me as a Roman Catholic nun. When we discovered that in Thanksgiving 1994, I was delivering dinners to homebound senior citizens in the West Village, while she did coke off a woman's ass in a house party not even a few blocks away, we lost interest. How are we going to top that? We didn't fit in, even with each other, but we quickly learned to be each other's home. Cheryl would listen to me when I talked about Heather, but she never seemed threatened by Diva Ghost. Not to be a jerk, she'd say, in her typical lifelong New Yorker way, but why would I be jealous of a dead person? After a year of dating, she wrote on my Facebook wall, happy first anniversary, honey. 12 months ago, we were solitary nerds. Today, we are a nerd unit. I don't even know if I believed in the concept of falling in love, but something sure was happening. She made me laugh. She inspired me to be my better self. She made me say corny shit like, I feel like I'm starting to trust life again. Cheryl was also extremely healthy. She worked out 3 times a week, had been sober for 10 years, a vegetarian for 20, and had never smoked. She was healthy until one day, quite suddenly, she wasn't. A year and a half after our first date, a year after we started calling ourselves girlfriend, on a Friday afternoon in November, Cheryl called me. The shortness of breath that her primary care provider had been calling asthma turned out to be related to Hodgkin's lymphoma because she had a cantaloupe-sized tumor in her chest. Ugh, why do they always compare tumors to fruit, she asked me after the oncologist left the room. And then we had a plan, aggressive chemo followed by radiation. I said, okay, we need to start telling people and we need to get some organized help. I opened a browser and typed in a caregiving support website. Wow, she said, how do you know how to? She trailed off. Let people help you, I said. People want to help. And she struggled with this. I mean, Cheryl struggled with it. She wanted to be the one helping people. And also, she'd had friends who failed her before. But she saw the practical side of asking people for specific help when a friend showed up with some hand knitted socks. Hand knitted socks that from a person who'd never hand knitted any socks before, and they had such a thick seam in them that it was like walking on an upside down ice skate. Cheryl started calling it homemade sock syndrome. Let people help you. People want to help, and ask them for specific things you need. End up with a lot of extremely uncomfortable, homemade, lovingly hand knitted socks. I sent out an email to my family telling them in the news. My brother responded, it's only somebody who had spent his entire life in the military could. It would seem, he wrote, that one situation of this type would be more than sufficient. Yeah, it would seem so. I didn't feel ready to have chemo in my date book again, but I love Cheryl, and I kept thinking, well, at least she has an experienced partner to deal with this stuff. And not being ready, that's of no consequence. That's not the way the world works. Plus, it was her first time having cancer, and she deserved as much support as we could give her. And although the chemo immediately began to shrink the cantaloupe, it was also doing a serious number on her white blood cells, and that made her susceptible to infection. Her oncologist agreed to continue with the treatment, but cautioned Cheryl that she needed to avoid germy places, which is, of course, the entire New York City subway system. So we moved the party into her Sunset Park apartment, and though Cheryl was extremely tired, we entertained so much that winter with sober folks and artists and poets and queers. And the strong chemo was working. Her tumor was shrinking, and things looked so bright until they didn't. It never occurred to me that Cheryl would be anything other than okay, even when she developed pulmonary fibrosis, which is a frequently fatal reaction to the standard Hodgkin's treatment. The bleomycin, the specific chemical in her weekly chemo cocktail, had caused inflammation in her lungs, and the continued inflammation made her lungs fibrotic. So the stiffer her lungs became, the harder it was for Cheryl to breathe. She spent 3 months in the hospital, and I was able to spend the entire 3 months right beside her, thanks to my short legs. I slept on top of the radiator, and our good friends. They brought us food, took away our laundry, took care of the apartment. Sometimes I'd just end up with a Diet Mountain Dew in one hand and a hamburger in the other, and like, how did this even get here? One of the residents in the ICU started calling it Cheryl's Army, the sheer volume of people that came through, checking on her, checking on us, bringing food, games, conversation. And when we ran out of bleomycin related pulmonary fibrosis treatment options, a friend who teaches at a medical school gave her students extra credit to dig through medical literature looking for other possibilities. I mean, when I shared the 1,700 citations with Heather's pulmonologist, he grimaced a little, but we looked through them together and actually found one promising medication, which did bring Cheryl a little bit of relief. Cheryl got better and then slowly worse again. She went to rehab for a time and we cheered. We thought, oh yeah, she's definitely she's going to recover completely. Cheryl, she wasn't so sure. She couldn't eat, wasn't able to stand, and was on continuous high dose oxygen. One night at rehab, when I crawled in bed to watch Animal Planet with her, she said, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And then, without another word, she turned her attention back to the lion chasing the gazelle. I couldn't coax more out of her, and it wasn't her final answer, perhaps, but she wanted me to know. Our last date was at Beth Israel Medical Center, complete with flowers, candles, and romantic poetry. Cheryl quipped, I guess this is just like a really weird bed and breakfast. The damage to Cheryl's lungs was too extensive, and she never returned home. A few hours before she died, she reached up to touch my face, and she said, I'm sorry, you didn't deserve any of this. And I said, I didn't, but I deserved you, and every moment has been beautiful and worth every tear. She rolled her eyes. Oh my God, you're such a fucking cornball. But she smiled. She knew I meant it. Why her death wasn't pretty, thanks to liberal amounts of morphine, it was as peaceful as it seemed ludicrous. When she died, I felt like I couldn't take a breath for months. The week Cheryl died, one of the nursing assistants at the rehab brought her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Cheryl turned to me, smiled, and said, "Aren't people so good?" I waited for the punchline. Cheryl had a really cynical sense of humor, thinking this was a sarcastic comment and would be followed by the context, perhaps a news story about a serial killer in the Midwest or a brutal dictator or an employer maybe who wouldn't hire her because she was overqualified. But the only context was that because she received so much love from her community, she was experiencing all the people who moved through her world just a little bit differently. Sometimes when love makes least sense, when hope makes no sense, you choose both. I hadn't made any promises this time, but I was such a giant sobby mess. As much as I could, I let folks help. And if you lose two partners at a relatively young age, there are some advantages. You kind of, I don't know, get better at it in some ways. I knew to stop people in mid conversation when they were about to compare the death of my spouse with the death, for example, of a guinea pig they had in their third grade classroom. I can see it coming now. Something in their eyes. I dyed my hair blue, which I also recommend because then people would walk up to me and say, "Kelli, I'm so sorry about Cheryl." "Oh my God, your hair is blue." And like Mark Doty said in his book about his partner's death, everything helped a little, but nothing helped enough. So I tried what worked the previous time. I found a grief support group, started writing comedy about what I was going through. Sometimes I would be sobbing in the green room, but when I came onto stage, I'd pull together and there would just be this hour of blissful peace while I made people laugh. All right, so maybe after surviving all this, I could be pardoned a little for feeling very proud of my own resilience, right? How I asked for help when I needed it, how I had evolved beyond my upbringing, how I came to understand my own vulnerability. I have this conquered, I have this licked, I can ask for help when I need it. I don't know. Is that being proud of how humble you are? Yeah. Well, okay. Because of an undertreated tibial plateau fracture as a child, I had to have a total knee replacement at 45. And 5 weeks after I had that knee replacement, I was walking 2 miles a day and I'd obtained 124 degrees of flexion. I even made a video of myself tap dancing and posted it on social media. But 7 weeks post-op, I developed this excruciating pain, couldn't move, and definitely couldn't tap dance. I visit my surgeon's physical assistant in their office who said it was just a local reaction and I didn't need to worry. When it got worse the next day, I called the answering service, and because I didn't have a fever, they said it was just a local reaction and I didn't need to worry. The next day was Friday, and I kind of was starting to worry. When I called the office again, the surgeon's PA returned my call and explained in a voice dripping with impatience, "Knee replacements hurt." My face reddened with 2 parts embarrassment and I guess in 1 part frustration. I hung up the phone. As the weekend progressed, my knee became more and more painful and swollen. My friend Jenny, who was visiting from Philly, said, "Are you sure this is okay? Maybe I should call them?" But I had felt so shut down by the PA's answer, I was not inclined to let anyone in that moment help me, especially not just to be nice. So I just say "Nah, it's okay." And that exchange continued throughout the weekend. By Monday morning, I couldn't even straighten my knee. I couldn't straighten it, so I couldn't even put it on the ground. And I agreed to let Jenny and a few other in my queer crew take me to the emergency room. And it was a holiday, and so I got a very low-ranking orthopedic surgeon resident. If you've been exposed to orthopedic surgeons, you know that they mostly look like bro dude frat types, right? Like they give out steroids with board certification. But this guy, he looked kind of like the orthopedic surgeon all the other orthopedic surgeons beat up on the playground, He very nervously, extremely nervously, maybe because every queer in Brooklyn was looking on, stuck a needle into my knee joint, and he pulled out copious amounts of frothy brown fluid. I said, "Oh, what's up?" "I don't know," said Dr. Dude, not a bro, "but this fluid is supposed to be yellow and clear." As it turns out, I was not having a local reaction. In fact, I had a raging, that's the clinical term they used, infection, and my white cells were triple what they're supposed to be. If it's possible, if I hadn't gone in that day, I could have died. They reopened my 12-inch incision and did an emergency washout service. surgery trying to mechanically clear as much of the infection as they could. I was told I'd need to be on IV antibiotics through central line for 3 months and oral antibiotics for a year. A few days later, when I was still in the hospital, but feeling a lot better, Jenny, the friend that had spent the weekend with me, and my friend Bryn were visiting. I remarked how much I appreciated their help. I probably even patted myself on the back a little bit. I'm glad I let you all help me. Jenny and Bryn exchanged looks, which, of course, when your friends are exchanging looks, you know you're in trouble. And Jenny said, I mean, eventually you did, when you didn't have any other choices. I wouldn't say you asked for help. I think you maybe tolerated it. I was starting to get mad and I was decided I wasn't going to listen, but I couldn't go anywhere. I was in the hospital bed. I figured it would be so rude to actually put my fingers in my ears. La, 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 I can't hear you. But mentally, that is exactly what I did. Then Bryn said, I don't get it. I don't get it. You've helped me so much when I was going through that bout of depression. I said, yeah, duh. That's what we do. We're a community. I know we don't say duh anymore. So then why did it take an act of God or a knee spurting pus for you to let us help you? It's a commentary on what you really think of people who need for help. There was nothing I could say then because I knew Bryn was right. And that I still had plenty of work to do. Jenny added, sometimes, my friend, the harder you try to be low maintenance, the higher maintenance you become. This past June, my mom had her 5th fall in 5 years, resulting in multiple fractures. My mom won't live with us. She has zero interest. I have a bunch of siblings. They all have space. She could live with me at Queer Study Hall. She wanted to keep her independence and live in assisted living in Florida. So after her 5th fall, I was dispatched to Florida to help with the transition from independent living to an assisted living facility. It's a big family. I'm the youngest sibling. When I'm needed, I'm dispatched. So how it went was my mom was scheduled to be released from the rehab, and that's where she had been since she had the fall. And I was supposed to bring her wheelchair and accompany her on the ride via the accessible van service. So when I got to the rehab, which was like this very rundown 1-story building, my mom called it worse for wear. My mom was sitting just inside the very smudged double glass doors. She had her bags on her lap and she looked like a homesick kid, very ready to leave summer sleepaway camp, but with perfect full face makeup and no smudges. And then there were staff members with clipboards and confused looks all around her. And the cheerful, accessible van driver arrived. And when the rehab staff did not immediately push my mom out, I opened the door, smiled, and said, ready to go? Are we ready to go? We can't let her go until she has a COVID form, said the staff person, whose fault it probably was not. It shows in the chart it was negative, but she needs it on this special form, and the night nurse filled it out, and now we can't find it. I guess it's lost. They were looking like for a few minutes, and the van driver, by that time, she and my mom had been chatting, and we knew her name was Betty. And she had 5 kids and 12 grandkids and had moved to Florida 7 years previously after a particularly bad Ohio winter. This very friendly woman said, I'm so sorry, I can only stay for 5 minutes. My dispatcher, I have another pickup. I called my brother, who said, follow your instincts. My mom's jaw was set, and this was in the middle of COVID, and this rehab was already super understaffed, and with COVID and all the restrictions, they were just not able to give great care. They left her on the toilet for 90 minutes one time, and we had to call multiple times about getting her adequate pain medication. I said, Mom, do you want to? She said, I'm not going back in there. I turned to Betty and said, I think we might be making a run for it. And Betty smiled so big. I guess maybe if you're an accessible van driver in suburban Florida, you don't really have that much positive excitement. She said, well, I guess we are. And we took off at a run, me, pushing my mom in her wheelchair, desperately trying to steer around the cracks in the pavement, and perspiration just like running down my face. It was June in Florida as we went down the path from the rehab to the waiting van, which is like beckon for us. Now, when we arrived at the assisted living, I would not say they were thrilled to see us. There was a flurry of activity and then a very lot of whispering. But it really only took them a few minutes to realize that accepting an electronic version of a form they wanted a hard copy of was a better idea than leaving an 86-year-old resident with a broken leg and her big fat queer adult child sitting in their front courtyard. When I left, I hugged my mom and I said, well, this was a day. She got this sneaky smile on her face and she said, did I just help you make a story? And then she got serious. I hate for you kids to have to help me like this. Now, there was a petty part of me that wanted to say, I was just doing it to be nice. But I can imagine, from my experiences, how hard it was for her to accept assistance. And so I just squeezed her arm and said, let me help you, Mom. People like to help. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for sharing your story with us tonight. Oh my goodness. Wow, you've experienced a lot.
Yeah, wow. This is one of the considerations. Is this too much for the audience to listen to? I used to try and put this in a 5-minute story, and I don't know if you know Beth Lapades, who's started. I was working with her. She's the first the godmother of alternative comedy, and she was like, I think you should give this story more than 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes is a little. It's not just going to be rough on the audience, it's going to be rough on you. So that's when it became a much longer piece.
Well, I think it's really extraordinary that you have this depth of story and experience and have navigated it with such wisdom and humor and grace. And it was really profoundly moving to hear you share that with us tonight. So thank you. I have, this whole series has been sort of interesting because we're taking folks who identify as LGBTQIA+, and we're centering them, their stories, their art, and more times than not, the stories have been about something else, like their sexuality, their identity, the gender has been part of the stories, but that's not actually what the thrust of their message is, or what the intent is in sharing the story. And I find that to be a very beautiful thing, because we get to see queer art and hold queer space that's not just self-reflective, but it's universal. And I think that's something we don't often get to see when invited into these kinds of spaces. But the sort of through line to all of this is we're reflecting on this legacy of Stonewall. Stonewall being a riot, Stonewall being an event that sort of shaped our cultural identity in a different way. And I'm just wondering for you, and kind of thinking of the continuum and your own experience included, and what you shared tonight included, what does the legacy of Stonewall mean to you? And how do those radical acts kind of materialize?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, of course, people have been doing work before Stonewall, and there are things that happened, parallel to Stonewall and in other countries and stuff. So thinking in terms of kind of those actions more generally, I mean, that's what makes my life possible, right? And it's kind of interesting. In 1996, I was involved in this kerfuffle. Is that how it's said? Kerfuffle? Yes. With the 1998 Philadelphia Dyke March. It was really about trans inclusion, and there was a sense of older dykes not feeling like they were heard in the conversation, and it was really interesting. And then one of the older women said, I don't really understand what you guys are trying to do here, because you don't understand what we went through. The word dyke, you have to fight for that word. That is not a word that you just get. And told some stories, and then she was like, but come to think of it, maybe this is the best part of activism, that you don't know what it was, that you didn't experience it. We changed life for you all so that you don't actually have to know. And I think of sometimes of that with feminism, and I see it even with the way my nephew, is like, oh, wait, Aunt Kelli is non-binary. I think he saw it in my Instagram and was asking his mom, should we be using like something besides Aunt for Aunt Kelli? Like, let's ask her, where he's, 13 or he's 14 now, but he's 13 when he asked that question, where it's just like a different world now. And, sometimes, like, I think of it even, I work with high schoolers, and today our high school is being fixed. So we're like guests in another high school for summer school. And there was like a kid who I thought was probably like stud or butch identified. And I kind of did an up nod at them, and they just kind of went to me. And I was like, how beautiful that, a 15-year-old kid who's like, masculine presenting, or people might see as masculine presenting, another masculine presenting, assigned female at birth person acknowledges them. And they don't necessarily even, it is the, law of the land that high schoolers must roll their eyes at everything, but like, they don't necessarily, like, they're not so thirsty that they're like, follow me down the hallway, and I was like, how beautiful is that kid has seen themselves reflected in many other places, not just like a random person walking down their high school hallway.
I really love and appreciate that you shared that example. A couple of years ago, when we were doing the Stonewall 50 plays, we had 100 queer artists in a room together. And one of the things that we noticed in that conversation was a really stark generational divide between the older folks, particularly like the gay men in the room who've lived through the AIDS crisis of a certain age, and the younger folks who are, very free and expressive with their sexuality, with their gender identity, and would make some grand pronouncements about identity and about the way that they view the world. And this really odd tension bubbled up in the room. Oh, did we lose Kelli? You're unmute. Okay, we're gonna unmute you. There you go. Hold on. Yes. All right.
Yeah, I completely lost internet. I think because the storm is just passing over, so I'm just on my phone, so we can continue.
That's pretty cool. I think maybe Jay might be MIA as well. I don't know where. There you. Okay. Hi. Thanks. I heard your story, but I don't know where you dropped off exactly. But I was saying I really appreciated what you had shared there. Because it's one of the things that cropped up in our work at Queen's Theater quite a bit. A couple years ago, we did the Stonewall 50 plays, which of course was 100 one-minute plays written by LGBTQIA artists. And we had this huge spectrum of people that came in to perform these plays. And one of the things we noticed really clearly, really palpably in that room was a generational tension, right? Particularly like older gay men who have lived through the AIDS crisis and are of a certain age, who look at these younger folks who are really like free with their expression, with their gender, with the they them pronouns, with the gender expression, with the living in the fluidity, which would say things like, queer men don't own the narrative on my sexuality or my queerness or my identity. And the older generation was looking at these young people and they were like, well, wait a minute, you don't understand what we went through at all, right? And one of the things that we really landed on was this really deep need to have intergenerational conversations in the queer community, because there is some sort of disconnect and there is some sort of history gap or understanding gap. And so one of the goals for us over the next couple of years and in this conversation and everything that we do is to sort of see what we can do to thread the needle and start to bridge that gap. So like one of the questions I have, we've been asking every artist is like, what are your thoughts on sort of the continuum of generations, and what are your hopes for the younger folks coming up? What do you observe them going through and hope that they will experience moving forward?
Well, it's interesting. I live with two queer people under 32, right? And I'm 53. But I came out a little late, so I'm not actually like, maybe like 20 queer years on them or something like that. It's so funny. I talk about things that happened literally before my almost 22-year-old roommate was born, like fights that are as old, like the 1998 Dyke March fight is as old as my roommate is, and it's been really interesting, you know, and what I still see, like, there's still this legacy of trauma, you know, and I firmly believe, like, I actually do a workshop called, Why Isn't My Body Speaking to Me? And it's like basically about forgiving yourself for everything you did to survive to get to the point where you are now, right? And there's still like a legacy of trauma. There's still, you know, and whatever the connection is between people not accepting their queer kids, you know, and certainly I think it's getting better, but it's not getting better everywhere, and it's not getting better for everyone. You know, I wish that we could spend, you know, I can remember saying to my therapist, like mentoring my therapist once in my show and once in the talk back, I feel like that's, you know, probably sufficient, but I just feel like, why am I, before I even get to the whole, before I can even climb the ladder of like adulthood and success, I feel like I need to climb out of this hole, you know, and we use a lot of our energy, especially early on, really managing our trauma. And, you know, that's of course not true just of LGBT people. I mean, of course, it's like, you know, we see that in so many different communities, Black American communities, especially, and well, folks of color in general, and immigrants, and, you know, that there's this legacy of trauma that uses up a lot of our surviving, ends up being so much if it could go beyond survival. And you see that in places, but also you see it also, you know, you see kids that come out happy, that are able to have family relationships and not have a 10-year gap with their parents while their parents work it out or whatever. But yeah, if we could, if the world could change, because that's not our problem. The legacy of trauma, you know, we know how to work through it, but, you know, the world needs to change for that. And certainly the legacy of religious trauma, you know, so many people who grew up, and, you know, it's lots of religions. I mean, evangelical Christianity and Catholicism is what I've experienced, but lots of religions are very homophobic. So we come carrying, like, not just like, oh, my parents hate me and God, great, you know.
I really appreciate hearing that. One of the things that I talked with Richard Cardillo last week about was this idea of faith, and faith separate from religion, but like especially as a queer artist, putting yourself on the line and telling these stories which are deeply vulnerable, and are really filled with a lot of experience that you know, you carry a lot on your back from what you went through, not only from the loss but from the other trauma that you were just discussing, and sort of like wondering like what the role of faith is in all of that, and how you find the kind of what you take from that helps move you forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, for me, there isn't, you know, whenever, like, my mom just died. That's not a part of the show because I haven't figured out how to work it in. It's too many deaths, but my mom just died. And, you know, like, I was like, all right, so I guess I'm writing a show about my mom now, you know, like, for me, that's like taking what was hard and saying like, okay, how can this help other people? Usually through performance, sometimes through workshops, sometimes just through sharing it, sometimes through, you know, being able to help people build caregiving teams or whatever. Like, that is for me the only way I know to metabolize things. Like, it's the only, because meaning is the only thing that brings it, like, giving meaning to suffering for me. I mean, it's, and I, you know, I remember saying to somebody, I was like, oh, it seems like I'm kind of a one-trick pony. And they're like, well, if you're only going to have one trick, it's a good one, you know? So for me, the fact that this can help me, that performing can help me find meaning in things, you know, that is, I mean, that seems like a gift. Like, oftentimes I remember when Cheryl was in the hospital thinking like, how do people do this who aren't comedians? Like, that seems impossible to do without comedy, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel similarly in that art is my church as well. And while that might be obvious for folks like us to kind of think about or internalize or share, it's not obvious for people listening sometimes. So it's always really valuable to hear and put words to that. And I so appreciate the humor and the kind of perspective that you found in navigate. I mean, I don't know if I could survive what you survived. with such grace and clarity, and the resilience that you're able to kind of beacon through your work and your words is it's healing, but it's also really valuable from a community perspective, because I think finding, especially after a year of COVID where so many deaths have happened, my cousin, who is a gay man, died 4 weeks ago of COVID, the Delta variant, very unexpectedly. And it was very, a lot to take in at once. After a year, we're getting to the end and the message is reopening, and here you have a family member who dies.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to make sense of when things happen. You know, I think finding examples of like what grieving looks like and what resilience looks like, and kind of the messaging that is so important for the community in general. So I really just wanted to thank you for your stories and your wisdom and your ideas tonight. And I guess just like anything else we want to talk about with our remaining time, like I know you shared with me earlier, you haven't performed this particular show that much, or maybe since COVID. So like, what do you want to do? Like, what are your goals? Like, where do you want to go from here?
Well, it's interesting, right? Like, this is a show that is very queer. You know, it's talking about two queer partners, and doesn't address gender as much as some of my other shows. But I feel like it has like the universality of it is everyone struggles to ask for help. You know, I mean, I guess there's some people like super entitled people who maybe don't struggle. Like when I've got like, you know, gotten upgraded to first class because I like had miles, or like, you know, agreed to be left back on a flight or whatever. I have to say that people in first class seem to not have any problem asking for help. But I think in general, you know, that is something a lot of people struggle with. So that seems like kind of universal. And to be honest, I mean, I never thought when I started performing really in earnest, like 2001. And I never thought that there would be any mainstream interest in my story or my stories, you know. It never occurred to me that there would be. Yeah. And I was like, you know, I was, you know, when Pride still had money to pay before 2008, I was making like 30% of my income just doing prides, you know, and I love that. That was very I love performing in a small town pride. And that kind of dried up, but like, I love performing in the community, and it never occurred to me that anyone that, you know, that really, to be honest, that straight people would be interested in stories with queer people as protagonists. But the world changed, which I never thought was going to happen. So this is kind of all new, navigating this beyond of folks really being interested. And when I first started having some good success with essays on Exo Jane, where they were getting shared 500,000 times, and I was like, what is going on? You know, what is happening? You know, the HuffPost piece I wrote about my COVID thing was like one of the pieces that went most viral in the beginning of the pandemic, you know. And I was like, wait, it was like literally about my like very queer experience. And also the picture that they had, I was wearing a mask because I was in the ICU, I had the mask on, and people could not tell, like they didn't know assigned female at birth. I mean, like, who knows my gender? I don't even know my gender, but they were assuming that I was like male. And then when I was talking about how thinking about my girlfriend like made it better for me, like the nasty comments were like, oh, that's so gay because like you are talking about your girlfriend. So it wasn't even like specifically homophobic or transphobic against reality. It was just like some weird, like, you know, so I was so amazed by that. And so this is like a whole new world. Like I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate it. I'm doing, like, I've been touring this kind of with virtual fringe festivals to kind of get it on its feet. It might be the next thing that I release as an album, but that would be like probably as an actual like video special as well. But I'm not sure because it's not easily broken into chunks. And that is actually helpful to do if you're going to take the Audible and put it on Spotify or whatever. I'm working on a 50 churches and 50 states tour right now. Which is a little slow going for obvious reasons, but that's my goal. It might take me a while to put together but there's a lot of queer affirming churches, and even more, there's a lot of churches who are feeling pretty guilty about the way they've treated LGBT people in the past, and they, you know, they would love to host a queer comedian. So I'm working on that. That's, you know, and then I also host Queer Memoir, which is a storytelling series that's been at about 100 different venues. We started in 2010. So we've been doing a little bit virtually, but we're coming back in IRL at Caveat on August 15th, which yeah, so we're really excited about that. The theme of that is queer memoir. What the hell was that about? So anyway, so for Second Helping, I'm trying to figure out where it's going. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to you know, have this experience of performing this way.
Well, it was really special to hear, and I look forward to seeing how we can support you further in the future. I think that this is a really amazing, really heartfelt story, and it's so valuable. And I think that the world should hear this. So I suspect you'll have no problem once you get it where everything you want out of it, that you'll be able to put this out into the world. But it is the kind of story that is adjacent to the year that we've had, and that it's universal with what we're feeling. And it's like about the thing without being about the thing, but it's still about the thing. And it gave me the feels in a major way. And so I really appreciate your vulnerability, your wisdom, your art, your humor, yourself, and your willingness to kind of sit here on the Zoom and talk with me and with our community tonight. So really, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for everyone who's here or watching later. Appreciate, you know, really appreciate that. So.